what? And then there was silence. I don't know where I am now. The darkness is endless, the air cold and still. But the demon is gone, or at least I think it is. Perhaps I escaped, or perhaps this is just another part of its game. Either way, I'm no longer afraid. I made my choice, and I'll face whatever comes next on my own terms. It started with a whisper, faint and chilling, the kind that dances on the edges of hearing and leaves you questioning your sanity. At first, I thought it was the wind slipping through the cracks of my old Victorian home, a creaking relic inherited from my estranged uncle, perched alone on the edge of a forest that seemed darker than night itself. The whispers began after I found the journal tucked away in the attic beneath a pile of brittle papers, its leather cover cracked and its pages smelling of mildew and age. The writings within were ramblings, chaotic scrawls of a man obsessed, charting symbols and words that seemed older than time itself, invoking something nameless and foul. I should have burned it. I should have walked away, but something compelled me. Something in those symbols felt alive, writhing when I glanced away, pulling me deeper into their labyrinth of incomprehensible dread. Days turned to weeks, and the whispers grew louder, more distinct, not merely sounds but words, guttural and ancient, scraping against the walls of my mind like nails on glass. Open the door, they hissed over and over, until the words bled into my dreams, waking me in cold sweats as I gasped for air, my heart pounding with a fear I couldn't rationalize. The house began to change. Small at first, like the shadows that clung to the corners even in daylight or the mirrors that reflected things that weren't there. Then the stench came, sulfur and decay, thick and cloying, filling every breath with an unholy filth that no amount of cleaning could erase. One night, as the clock struck 3, a deafening silence descended, the kind that presses on your eardrums and screams louder than sound itself. Then I saw it, or rather, I felt it before I saw it. The air grew heavier, suffocating, as if the house itself was alive and breathing down my neck. In the far corner of the room, a darkness deeper than blackness gathered, pulsating and writhing as if reality was folding in on itself. 2 eyes opened within that void, red, unblinking, and filled with a hatred that froze my blood and locked me in place. You called? It growled, a voice that vibrated through my bones, and I realized, with a sickening clarity, that the whispers hadn't been asking me to open a door, they had been opening me. My body betrayed me, drawn forward as if by invisible chains, every muscle screaming in defiance but moving nonetheless, dragging me toward the abyss that now consumed half the room. It was no longer just a shadow. It had form, a grotesque, shifting amalgamation of limbs and claws, faces that weren't faces, mouths where no mouths should be, each speaking in a cacophony of despair that echoed the screams of countless souls. I could feel it, no, I knew it, peering into me, unspooling every secret, every fear, every sin I had ever committed. My mind was an open book, and it devoured each page hungrily. "You are mine?" it whispered, a promise more than a threat. And suddenly, I was falling, not physically but mentally, spiritually, as if my very essence was being torn from my flesh. The world warped around me, walls stretching into infinity, the floor beneath me splitting into an endless chasm of teeth and flames. Faces emerged from the walls, screaming silently, their eyes pleading for salvation, their mouths mouthing words I couldn't comprehend. I ran, or at least I tried. My legs felt like lead, each step dragging me further into the house, which was no longer a house but a labyrinth of horrors, endless corridors filled with echoes of my own terrified breathing. Doors appeared and disappeared, each opening to reveal sights more grotesque than the last. A room filled with flayed bodies writhing in agony. Another where a mirror reflected not my image but a version of myself mutilated beyond recognition. And one where my loved ones stood, their faces blank, their eyes bleeding as they reached out for me, chanting, "You brought this upon us." And then I saw it again, the demon no longer confined to the shadows but towering before me, its form impossibly large, its presence filling every inch of space and every corner of my mind. It smiled, a grotesque parody of joy, its teeth jagged and yellow, dripping with a viscous black fluid that hissed and burned as it hit the ground. "You will serve?" it declared, and with those words, I felt myself unraveling, my thoughts no longer my own, my will slipping away like sand through my fingers. I tried to scream, but no sound came. I tried to pray, but the words turned to ash in my mouth. All I could do was fall to my knees as the demon reached out, its clawed hand caressing my face with a mockery of tenderness. And then it spoke my name. Not my name as others knew it, but the name of my soul, the name that resonated deep within me. A name I didn't know I had but recognized instantly. In that moment, I realized the truth. This wasn't the beginning. I had called it long before I ever found the journal, long before I ever set foot in this cursed house. It had always been with me, whispering from the shadows of my childhood fears, lurking in the corners of every darkened room. This was destiny, a fate I had been blind to until now. And as its laughter echoed through the infinite corridors of my broken mind, I knew there was no escape. The door was open, and I was no longer me. I was its vessel, its pawn, its plaything for eternity. I never believed in demons. Not really. Sure, I'd read the stories, those late-night tales shared around a campfire or whispered among friends when the power went out. But they were just that, stories, until it happened to me. It started innocently enough. I was alone at home, bored out of my mind, flicking through old family photo albums that hadn't seen the light of day in years. That's when I found it. An old, cracked photograph of my great-grandfather, a man I never knew. He looked strange. There was something in his eyes, something unsettling, but I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was the grainy black and white photo. Maybe it was just my imagination. But something about the photo nagged at me. It was taken in a dark room, shadows casting odd shapes across his face. And on the back of the photo, barely legible in faded ink, was a name. The One Who Walks Beneath. Curiosity got the better of me, and I began researching. Old newspapers, obscure online articles, even records from the local library, anything I could find. And that's when I stumbled upon it. A hidden legend about a demon that had been said to haunt my family for generations. It was called the One Who Walks Beneath, a creature that fed on fear and sorrow, growing stronger with every soul it consumed. The story was chilling, but what really caught my attention was the part where it said that once the demon had been summoned, it could never truly be destroyed, could only be kept at bay for a time. The ritual was simple, too simple, and I thought it was all just superstition. But the more I read, the more obsessed I became with the idea. I had to know. I had to prove it was all a lie. I found the ritual buried in an old text, hidden within a book that smelled like decay. The steps were clear. A circle drawn with blood, chants spoken at midnight, and a single offering. The more I thought about it, the more I convinced myself that it was just an old tale, a myth meant to scare children. So, in a haze of youthful arrogance, I decided to try it. It was a terrible mistake. The basement was cold, too cold for a summer night, but I didn't care. I followed the instructions to the letter. The candles flickered as I completed the circle, the air thickening with each whispered word. And then, just as I finished the chant, the room went deathly still. A silence that felt too unnatural, like the world had ceased to exist outside that circle. First, nothing happened. I stood there for what felt like hours, waiting for something, anything. But then I heard it, a low, guttural whisper that seemed to come from all around me, as though the very walls were breathing. "You have called me?" The voice rasped, the words like nails scraping against my soul. My heart pounded in my chest as the temperature plummeted. The candles flickered out, one by one, until I was plunged into darkness. I felt it then, something behind me, something massive and suffocating. I dared not turn around, but I could feel its presence like a weight pressing against my back. And then I heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming closer, each step like a drumbeat in the silence. My breath caught in my throat. The air seemed to thicken, choking me, and I knew that the creature was near. But I didn't turn, couldn't. I was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. And then the voice came again, closer now, its whisper slithering into my ears. "You think you summoned me by choice, but it was always meant to be this way. You belong to me now." I felt a cold hand brush against the back of my neck, icy fingers curling around my skin. I screamed, but the sound was muffled, as if the very air had swallowed it whole. Suddenly, a flash of light illuminated the room, blinding white light that seared my vision. When my eyes adjusted, I saw it. It wasn't what I expected. The demon wasn't a monster with horns or claws. No, it was far worse. It was human, or it had been once. Its skin was a sickly gray, stretched tight over its bones like a death mask, and its eyes were black holes, voids that seemed to pull everything into them. Its mouth was a gaping maw, filled with rows of jagged, broken teeth. It grinned at me, and I felt my soul begin to unravel. "You called me," it said, its voice like the scratching of nails on a chalkboard. "Now you will serve me. Your blood will feed me. Your fear will sustain me." It reached out a skeletal hand, and I couldn't move. I couldn't escape. The creature's touch was cold, and as it grasped my arm, a sharp pain shot through me, like icy needles piercing my flesh. It wasn't just physical pain. It was as though it was tearing through my very essence, ripping apart the parts of me that made me human. I could feel it, this thing draining me, feeding off my fear. It was a slow, agonizing process, and I was powerless to stop it. The demon's laughter filled my ears, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out. But just before the darkness overtook me, I saw someone, standing in the doorway, a figure cloaked in shadow, too tall and too thin to be real. Its face was obscured, but I could feel its presence, something ancient, something terrifying. And then the demon froze. The room fell silent, and the grip on my arm loosened. The creature hissed, its mouth curling into a snarl as it turned toward the shadow. "No," it whispered, its voice trembling. "Not you." The figure stepped forward, and in a voice that sounded like the grinding of stones, it spoke. "You are the one who walks beneath." The demon recoiled, but it was too late. The shadow surged forward, engulfing the creature in an overwhelming wave of darkness. There was a deafening roar as the two forces collided, the sound of metal against stone, of bones snapping. And then, silence. The shadow turned to me, its form coalescing into something more familiar. A man, or what was left of one. He looked at me with eyes that glowed like molten silver, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt something other than fear, hope. "You're safe now," he said, his voice like the wind through dead trees. "But you will never forget what you've done. You will carry this with you always." I wanted to ask him who he was, what had happened, but before I could speak, The room around us began to collapse, the walls crumbling away like dust. The last thing I saw before everything went black was his eyes, those glowing silver eyes, watching me. When I woke up, I was in my bed, the sunlight filtering through the curtains. I thought maybe it had all been a dream, but the mark on my arm, a twisted black scar, told me otherwise. And as I looked out the window, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A shadow lurking just beyond the tree line. I had called the demon and it had marked me, and now it would never let me go. I had always been a skeptic, a rational thinker, someone who dismissed ghost stories and supernatural tales as mere products of overactive imaginations. That was until I moved into the old house on Millstone Road. It wasn't much to look at, just a two-story Victorian home tucked away at the edge of a small, dying town. I should have known there was something wrong with it the moment I laid eyes on it. The air around the house always felt thick, like something was pressing in from all sides, but I brushed it off as just the place being old and decaying. The first night, I was greeted with the kind of silence that only exists in places that have been forgotten. No hum of the city, no wind in the trees, just an oppressive stillness that made my skin crawl. But I told myself it was nothing. I'd unpacked, set up, and tried to get comfortable, but I felt uneasy. The house, with its crooked floorboards and creaky stairs, seemed to be watching me, waiting. That's when I first heard it, a low, guttural growl. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, the wind shifting through cracks in the walls, but the growl grew louder each night, deep, resonating in the pit of my stomach. I'd get up to investigate, checking every room, but there was never anything there. I tried to ignore it, tell myself I was imagining things, but the noises didn't stop. They started following me, getting closer, growing in frequency until they were unmistakable. Then the whispers began, faint, like a breeze in the dead of night, but their words were clear in my ears. "You're not alone." I couldn't sleep anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt its presence. Something watching, something waiting. I thought it was just stress, that maybe I was cracking under the pressure of being in a new place. But deep down, I knew it was something worse. One night, after hours of lying in bed wide awake, I heard it again. A voice, clearer this time, coming from the shadows in the corner of my room. "You have opened the door." I froze, heart racing, every muscle in my body locked in terror. The voice wasn't human. It was cold, guttural, like something that had crawled out of the very depths of hell. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. The darkness in the corner of the room thickened, swirling like smoke, and then I saw it. At first, it was just a silhouette, a shadow that stretched and twisted unnaturally. But as it drew closer, I saw its true form. Its skin was pale, like white marble, cracked and peeling, and its eyes, they weren't eyes at all, just black voids that seemed to swallow the light. Its mouth opened impossibly wide, too wide for a human, filled with rows of sharp, broken teeth. And then it spoke, its voice seeping into my mind, not through my ears. "You woke me from my slumber, human." The air around me grew cold, a frigid, bone-chilling cold that seemed to freeze the very blood in my veins. I could feel it, inside me, crawling through my mind, scraping against my sanity. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My throat was tight, choking, as if it were being squeezed by invisible hands. "You shouldn't have come here," it whispered. "This is my domain. I've been here long before you, and I'll be here long after you." The room began to warp around me, the walls stretching and bending like rubber. I could see shadows flickering at the edges of my vision, figures that were not quite human, moving just out of reach. I could hear whispers, soft at first, then louder, a chorus of voices calling out to me from the darkness. They spoke in languages I didn't understand, their words twisted and filled with malice. My mind was unraveling. I couldn't think straight anymore. It was too much. The presence, the whispers, the shapes in the shadows. It was suffocating. I ran. I couldn't think, couldn't reason. I just ran, stumbling through the house, slamming doors behind me in a futile attempt to escape. But no matter where I went, I couldn't outrun it. It was everywhere. The walls seemed to close in around me. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet like they were alive. And that voice, its voice, echoed through the halls, growing louder with each step. It was toying with me, tormenting me, dragging me deeper into its world. I could feel the floor beneath me shift, as though the house itself were alive with something ancient, something hungry. Then I found the basement door. I don't know why I went down there. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe I thought I could hide. But as soon as I stepped into the basement, I knew I had made a terrible mistake. The air was thick, humid, like I had stepped into a tomb. The darkness was absolute, so deep it felt like it was pressing in on me, suffocating me. And then I saw it, the symbol, painted on the wall in what looked like blood, a strange, twisted shape that seemed to pulse with life. I reached out, my fingers trembling as I traced the edges of the symbol. That's when I heard it, a low, resonating sound, like the rumble of thunder, but deeper, more primal. It was coming from the floor. I knelt down, my hand shaking as I touched the cold, rough surface of the basement floor, and that's when I felt it, the heartbeat. It was there, beneath the floorboards, like the pulse of some great, ancient being, vibrating through the very bones of the house. And then the voice returned, louder this time, almost in my ear. "You are mine now. I will never let you leave." My heart slammed in my chest as the floor beneath me gave way, and I fell into the darkness. The fall seemed to last forever, an endless drop into the void, until I hit the ground with a sickening thud. I couldn't move. I could barely breathe. And then the lights flickered on. But this wasn't the basement anymore. It was something else, something ancient, something that should not exist. I was standing in a vast, cavernous space, the walls lined with grotesque statues of twisted figures, their eyes glowing faintly, watching me. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the ground beneath my feet was cold, slick with some dark, viscous substance. And then I saw it, the thing that had been waiting. It was massive, a twisted, monstrous form, its body writhing and shifting like it was made of shadows. Its eyes, blacker than pitch, locked onto mine, and it grinned, a horrible, twisted smile that sent a spike of terror through my chest. "You cannot escape," it whispered, its voice like 1,000 souls screaming in agony. "You belong to me now." And in that moment, I realized the truth. I hadn't just moved into a house. I had walked into its domain. I had summoned it. And now there was no escape. The demon had claimed me, body and soul, and it would drag me into the depths of its world, where there was no light, no hope, just the endless torment of its hunger, forever. I should have never come here. I should have never walked into this forsaken house on the outskirts of town. But when you're desperate, you do things you would normally never consider. It's funny, isn't it? How desperation can cloud your judgment and lead you to places where nightmares become your reality. This place, this house, it was never meant to be lived in. From the moment I set foot inside, I felt it, something thick and unnatural in the air, a weight pressing down on my chest. The walls, peeling and covered in darkness, seemed to groan with the weight of years, decades, centuries of secrets buried in every crevice. But still, I convinced myself it was just an old house, nothing more. I'm a man of logic, a skeptic. Nothing could break me, right? That night, I sat on the floor, listening to the eerie silence, the kind of silence that fills a room like smoke, suffocating everything it touches. But then, something shifted. A low hum, barely noticeable at first, like the buzz of a fly in the distance. But then it grew louder, deeper, darker. A growl that seemed to emanate from the very walls, from the foundation itself. I brushed it off, assuming it was nothing more than the house settling. But as the days dragged on, the sounds grew more sinister, more deliberate. They were following me, stalking me, growing in frequency until I couldn't ignore them any longer. That's when the whispers started soft, faint at first, like the rustling of paper, but then clearer, sharper. You are not alone. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It felt as though every step I took was being observed by unseen eyes, and every movement was a whisper in the darkness. I tried to laugh it off, to tell myself I was just being paranoid, but deep down I knew something was terribly wrong. One night, as I lay in bed wide awake, the darkness in the room seemed to thicken. That's when I heard it, clear as day, a voice, cold and guttural, coming from the very corner of the room. You have opened the door. My blood ran cold. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, but the sound was locked in my throat, choking me. And then I saw it. At first, it was just a shadow, an indistinct blur in the corner of my eye. But as I stared, the darkness began to take shape. It was wrong, unnatural. Its form stretched and contorted like a twisted reflection in broken glass. The skin, pale and cracked like marble, hung loosely from its frame, and its eyes, God, those eyes, were not eyes at all. They were black voids, empty and endless, swallowing every shred of light in the room. The mouth opened impossibly wide, filled with rows of broken, jagged teeth, and the air turned freezing, so cold that I could feel my very soul being pulled from my body. You woke me? It rasped, its voice curling around me, invading my mind. You shouldn't have come here. This is my domain. I have been here long before you, and I will remain here long after you are dust. The room began to shift and warp, bending in ways that no reality should allow. The walls seemed to melt, the floor beneath my feet buckled, and in the corners of my vision, shadowy figures flickered and vanished, just out of reach. The whispers intensified, voices rising into a cacophony of malicious intent, languages I could not comprehend. Yet the malice in them was undeniable. Panic set in. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. My head was spinning, my mind fracturing under the weight of it all. The demon's voice became a steady beat, like a drum pounding in my chest. I ran, stumbling through the house, my breath ragged in my throat. But no matter where I went, it was there. It was everywhere. It was part of the house, part of the walls, part of the very air I breathed. The floor beneath me seemed to shift, as though it were alive, pulling me toward the basement. Why did I go to the basement? Maybe it was instinct. Maybe I thought I could hide. But as soon as I opened that door, I knew I had made a mistake. The air was thick, suffocating, and the darkness there was deeper, more consuming than anything I had ever felt. The basement felt alive, its walls pulsing with a heartbeat that wasn't my own. I saw it then, a symbol, drawn in what looked like blood, twisted and malformed, an ancient mark that pulsed with some dark energy. I couldn't stop myself. My hand reached out to touch it, tracing the edges with trembling fingers. That's when I heard it, the low rumble, like thunder deep beneath the earth, the sound of something ancient awakening. The floor beneath me shook, and the heartbeat grew louder, thundering in my chest, rattling my bones. "You are mine," the voice whispered, cold and dripping with malice. "You are mine now." I wanted to scream, to flee, but my body refused to move. The floor cracked open beneath me, and I fell, endlessly, spiraling into the darkness. When I landed, I wasn't in the basement anymore. I was somewhere else, somewhere far worse. The space around me was cavernous, like the bowels of the earth itself, filled with grotesque statues, their twisted faces leering at me, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The air reeked of decay, and the ground was slick with some dark, viscous substance. I didn't know where I was or how to escape, but I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer in control. That's when I saw it, the thing that had been waiting, a massive, writhing mass of shadows, its body shifting like smoke, its eyes, those black, empty eyes, locked onto mine. It grinned, a smile twisted in a way no human smile should ever be. "You cannot escape," it hissed, its voice a chorus of 1,000 souls screaming in agony. "You belong to me now." And in that moment, I realized the truth. I hadn't just moved into a house. I had walked into its domain. I had woken it, and now I was its prisoner, forever. The demon had claimed me, and there would be no escaping its clutches. The darkness was my home now, and the torment had just begun.